Montana Territory. 1883. The wind cut sharp along the open tracks of the Deerfield station, lifting dust and snowflakes as Eleanor O'Neal pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. The train was late, but she stayed rooted to the platform, one gloved hand gripping the handle of her leather suitcase. She was leaving. She had to. Behind her, the town was small and quiet, still waking under the pale morning light. A few men loaded crates into a wagon. A boy chased a dog near the depot. No one noticed the woman with the faraway stare, or the letter folded tight in her pocket creased at the edges from too many readings. She looked down the tracks again. Her eyes burned from holding back tears. Eleanor, she turned. The man approaching her wore a trail coat dusted with frost and a hat pulled low over his brow, but she would have known that voice anywhere. Deep, warm, with that steadiness that used to calm her when the world felt too sharp. Samuel McCrae. Of all the faces she had hoped not to see this morning, his was the one she had dreamed about the most. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice catching. "You were really going to leave without saying goodbye?" he asked, stepping closer, his boots crunching on the frozen boards. She looked down. "There is nothing left to keep me here." Samuel's jaw tightened. "That is not true," her hand clenched around the suitcase handle. "I lost everything, Sam. My father's gone. The ranch was sold off in pieces. I gave up 2 years trying to make it work alone. And now I have no place here. You have me." His words came low, certain. She shook her head. "We were children. Whatever was between us, it was real," he said. "And it still is. You just will not look at it." Eleanor stepped back. "I am going to Chicago. There is a position for me there as a clerk at a law office. It is not much, but it is a start." "I know," he said quietly, her eyes flicked up, surprised. "You knew?" "I read the letter you left with Mrs. Keating. She gave it to me yesterday. I came as fast as I could." His voice cracked slightly before he steadied it. "I could not let you leave without telling you the truth." "What truth?" He stepped closer, close enough she could feel the heat of him through the cold air. "You do not need to start over somewhere else. You already have a life here, and I want to be part of it." Her breath caught. "You do not know what you are saying." "I do," he said. "I have known since we were 16 and you broke my nose with a shovel because I laughed when you fell in the creek." A laugh broke out of her, unsteady and sharp. "You deserved that." "I probably did." He smiled, something soft and real lighting in his eyes. "But I also remember how you stayed up with me when my mother passed, and how you used to leave bread and apples on our porch when Pa had nothing left in the cellar." Eleanor blinked hard. "Those were hard times." "They were," Samuel agreed. "But you never walked away, not from anyone." "Do not walk away from me now." Her grip on the suitcase loosened. "You do not understand, Sam. People talk. They say I am nothing but a burden now, too much pride and ruin to offer anyone. I do not care what they say. I care what I know. And I know you, Eleanor O'Neal. You are strength and fire and kindness. You are everything good I have ever known." She turned her face away, blinking furiously. "Please do not make this harder." He stepped in front of her, tipping her chin up gently with his gloved fingers. "Do not leave, Eleanor. Love's already here." The whistle blew down the tracks, distant but approaching. Samuel reached for her suitcase. "Stay." Her heart pounded. Wind pulled her skirt around her legs and the sound of the train grew louder. She looked down at the suitcase, then up at him. And slowly, with trembling fingers, she let go. The suitcase dropped to the platform with a quiet thud. Samuel's face broke into quiet relief, his breath fogging in the cold between them. Eleanor stared up at him. "You really want me?" "I have always wanted you," he said, voice steady. "I just needed to make sure you knew it." Her hands lifted to his coat, holding him like she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. "I was so sure I had to run." Not anymore, he said, wrapping his arms around her tightly. You are home now. The train thundered past behind them. Neither of them turned to look. She buried her face against his chest, and he held her there, the world falling away. For the first time in years, Eleanor O'Neal did not feel alone. The snow had stopped by mid-morning, leaving the land glazed and glinting under a pale sun. Samuel led Eleanor along the narrow trail behind the livery, their boots crunching over frozen mud. She didn't speak, not out of doubt, but because the quiet between them felt like something sacred. Not silence, exactly, just stillness, the kind that let a person breathe. He opened the gate to the small pasture behind his cabin. 2 horses stood near the fence, steam rising from their nostrils. Eleanor paused to rest a hand on the neck of the bay gelding, its thick winter coat coarse beneath her glove. I didn't know you still kept 2, she said, tracing the edge of its bridle. I don't, he said. That one came from the Porter place a week back. They couldn't feed him through winter, figured I had enough hay to last. She nodded, eyes on the horse. You always had a way with the ones folks gave up on. He didn't answer right away. Just unlatched the door to the shed and waited for her to step inside first. The warmth hit her skin like breath. A stove glowed red in the corner, and the room smelled faintly of pine sap and tobacco. The shelves were mostly bare, some folded canvas, a few tools, a rifle hanging across the far wall. His saddle sat on a barrel, oiled and worn smooth. She moved to the stove and held her hands out toward the heat. You live simple. Never needed much. Samuel leaned against the doorframe. But I wouldn't mind the place feeling less hollow. She glanced over her shoulder. You thinking of marrying then? His brow furrowed, not with surprise, but something quieter. I've been thinking about building the kind of life someone could come home to. Eleanor stepped back from the stove. That's someone being me. I'd like it to be, he said, but I won't ask you to decide today. She crossed the room slowly. Her gloves were off now, and she ran her bare fingers along the edge of his workbench. You always had a plan in your head, didn't you? I had a hope, he said. That you might turn back before the train came. She let out a breath, soft as dust. I didn't know how to stay, not with everyone expecting me to fail. He took a step closer. Let them expect what they will. You're not living for their comfort. She looked up at him, and her eyes held something steadier than they had that morning. And if I do stay, what then? I'll finish the rooms I started in the back, he said. Fix the porch before spring. We'll plant something come thaw. She said, voice low. He met her gaze. Only if you want to. Eleanor didn't speak for a long moment. She walked past him, opened the door, and stepped out into the yard. The wind had softened. The fence creaked gently, and the horses moved slow through the drifts. She stood there a while, looking toward the mountains. When she turned, Samuel was still there, watching her like he was afraid to move too fast. I want to, she said. His shoulders eased, his face unreadable but no longer tense. He held the door open as she came back inside. You'll need help digging out that back room, she said, brushing snow from her skirt. I figured as much. And paint. These walls are the color of a winter bruise. He chuckled. I'll let you choose the color. She looked around again, slower this time. You'll need curtains too, and a place to set books. I reckon I can build a shelf. She met his eyes then and stepped forward till her hand rested lightly against his chest. I never thought I'd find peace again. You didn't lose it, he said. You just carried it too long alone. She leaned into him, not all at once, but enough to feel the sure weight of his arms fold around her. When she finally rested her cheek against his shoulder, he said nothing more. Just held her there like she was something already his, not borrowed or bargained for. Outside, the wind settled down to a hush. Inside, the stove crackled low and steady, and between them nothing needed mending, nothing left unsaid. By the time the sun crested above the far ridge, Eleanor had chopped kindling with sleeves rolled past her elbows and her hair tied back in a hasty knot. The wind had gone still for once, and the land outside Samuel's cabin stood quiet and white, save for the crows tracing low shadows over the fields. She leaned the axe against the stump and wiped her brow with the back of her wrist. When she turned, she saw him crossing the yard with a bundle of fence rails over one shoulder. "You always this handy with a blade?" he asked, setting the rails down with a dull thud. "My father never cared for idle hands," she said. "Even when I was small, he'd set me to breaking ice for the stock tanks before breakfast." Samuel nodded, brushing snow from his coat sleeve. "I remember. He once told me you were tougher than any ranch boy he ever hired." I think he meant it as a warning. "He wasn't wrong," he said, meeting her eyes, "but I never minded." She looked down at the pile she'd split and nudged a few pieces into a neater stack. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, I could make things right again. But some things don't come back, no matter how many fences you patch." "They don't," he said, "but new things can grow where the old ones fell." She glanced at him, uncertain. "You really believe that?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "I wouldn't have asked you to stay if I didn't." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up a branch and snapped it clean in her hands. "I used to dream of a house with a root cellar and a proper chimney. Somewhere quiet at night where you could hear the fire breathe." Samuel watched her hands. "We can build that, not all at once, but over time." Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the pasture. "I never learned how to keep bees. My mother was going to teach me, but she passed before spring came again." "I know a woman in Bridger who keeps hives near her orchard," he said. "I'll take you there when the snows lift." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You always did have a way of answering things I hadn't said yet," he shrugged. "You've never been easy to read, but I learned to listen." She studied him a moment, then wiped her palms on her skirt. "What made you wait for me? You weren't gone," he said simply. "Just lost for a while," she exhaled, slow and quiet. "I think I'm ready to be found." They stood there without speaking, the hush between them thick with something warmer than the air. Then Eleanor bent to gather the kindling in her arms. "I'll bring this inside," she said. "The stove's nearly out." Samuel lifted the last log from the pile and followed her to the door. "I'll get the stew started." Inside, the cabin had taken on a lived-in look. Her coat hung beside his near the door, and her boots were lined up neatly beside the hearth. A folded quilt rested on the rocking chair, and his mother's old tin coffee pot sat warming on the stove. As Eleanor knelt to feed the fire, Samuel set the pot of beans on the grate and stirred them with a wooden spoon. The scent of salt pork and onions filled the space. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded, famished. He ladled the stew into 2 bowls and handed one to her. They sat at the rough-hewn table, their knees bumping beneath it, the world outside fading to a blur of snow and distant trees. After a few spoonfuls, Eleanor set her bowl down and looked at him. "I'm not used to being wanted for more than what I can do." He kept his gaze steady. "I want you for who you are when there's nothing to prove." Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "That woman's still learning who that is. Then we'll find her together." She reached across the table, fingers brushing his. No fanfare, no trembling. Just a simple, sure touch that said, "I'm here." That was enough. For now, it was everything. The sky carried a low hush that afternoon. Clouds stretched thin like worn muslin, and the air smelled faintly of iron and thawing earth. Eleanor sat on the porch step, mending the cuff of a linen work shirt she found folded at the bottom of Samuel's trunk. The thread bit through the fabric with a steady rhythm, but her thoughts wandered wide. Behind her, Samuel's boots moved across the floorboards of the cabin, steady and sure as always. He was sawing something in the back room, a shelf. she guessed, though he hadn't said. He didn't need to. The sound was its own kind of promise. A wagon rolled past the fence line, the driver raising a hand in greeting. She nodded in return, but her mind was elsewhere, still circling the words she hadn't spoken aloud yet. The ones that had pressed at her chest since the moment she'd stepped off that platform and let the train pass. When the sawing stopped, she didn't turn. She just said, "Did you ever think about leaving?" There was a pause, then the creak of the porch as he stepped outside. "Once. After my brother died." She set the shirt aside, folding it over her knee. "Where would you have gone?" "Wyoming Territory. There was talk of jobs near Laramie, laying lines for the new telegraph stretch." "Why didn't you go?" "I figured I'd carry the same weight wherever I went. And out here, at least I knew the lay of the land." She traced the grain of the step with her thumb, drawing over the worn wood. "I thought if I got far enough from here, the past wouldn't follow." He sat beside her, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. "You found different." "I did." Her voice thinned. "I kept waking up with the same ache, no matter the town." The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the hem of her skirt. She watched a hawk circle above the tree line, its wings barely moving. "I got a letter from my cousin in Illinois before I left," she said. "She said I could board with her and take lessons at night. She thought I might teach school again." "Is that what you wanted?" he asked. "I wanted to feel useful. I wanted to be above pity." Samuel didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You've never needed to outwork your worth." She reached down for the shirt again, but her fingers stalled over the stitch. "I'm not sure I know how to live gentle, Sam. I've been bracing for something to break for too long." He looked out over the yard. "Then we start small. One quiet morning at a time." She turned to face him. "And if I falter, then I'll steady you." Her throat tightened, but she breathed through it. "I didn't come back because I was ready. I came back because I couldn't carry it alone anymore." "That's enough," he said. "You don't have to be ready to belong." She leaned into his shoulder, the fabric of his shirt warm from work and sun. His hand found hers, not hurried, not seeking, just resting there like it had always known the shape of her fingers. "I want to plant lavender by the porch," she murmured. He nodded. "We'll dig the bed after the frost breaks. And maybe some hens," she added. "Not too many, just enough for eggs. I can build a coop behind the tool shed." She smiled, eyes closing for a moment. "I think I'd like this place to feel lived in. Not just kept." Samuel watched the hawk glide down toward the trees. "Then let's live in it proper." She didn't reply, but her hand tightened around his, quiet and sure, and for the first time in years she felt the ground beneath her settle. By early March, the ground began to soften, and the snow melted in shallow rivulets that fed the edge of the creek beyond the pasture. The cabin's porch no longer groaned beneath frost and ice, but the wood still held the scent of winter pine sap and smoke, faint but lingering. Eleanor stood just past the gate, sleeves rolled as she drove the spade into the earth. Her braid had come undone near the base, wisps curling along her neck with the damp of work. Samuel was squatting beside her, smoothing the edge of the garden bed with his hands. He didn't speak, just watched the soil crumble between his fingers. She stole a glance at him and straightened with a sigh. "You're thinking something," she said. He brushed dirt from his palms. "I was wondering why you chose lavender." She leaned on the spade and considered. "Because it holds its shape, even when the wind's hard. And come August, it draws bees, keeps away flies. My mother used to dry sprigs behind the stove. The smell would last through winter." He nodded but didn't look up. "I didn't know that." "There's still a great deal you don't know," she said. He smiled faintly. "Then I'll keep learning." They worked without words for a while, turning earth, measuring rows with twine stretched between stakes. When the shadows stretched long across the yard, Eleanor laid the spade down and dusted her hands on her apron. "That should do for today," she said. Samuel stood, stretching slow. "You want to walk a while?" She hesitated, then nodded. They left the tools in the shed and crossed the pasture where the horses grazed among patches of dry grass. Beyond the creek, the hills rolled soft and wide, the trees still bare but beginning to bud at the tips. They followed the stream bank until the cabin was out of sight, the water moving low and clear beside them. "I've been thinking about your mother," he said after a stretch of silence. Eleanor slowed. "What about her?" He picked up a flat stone and sent it skipping across the water. "How she must have carried so much alone. I wonder if she ever had anyone who saw her for more than what she did each day." She knelt by the stream and dipped her fingers in the cold water. "She was quiet, always doing, never saying much. But when I was little, I'd catch her humming sometimes when she thought no one listened. She had a softness that didn't show unless you looked close." Samuel crouched beside her. "You've got that too." She looked at him, startled. "That same quiet strength," he said, "but I see what's beneath it." "And what's that?" she asked. "Someone who's still learning how to rest." She didn't answer, just watched the water trickle past her hand. After a moment, she said, "I've never known what it's like to be still without guilt." He tilted his head. "Would you want to?" "I think I would." They walked back slower, the sky turning gold behind the pines. When they reached the porch, the scent of stew drifted out the open window. Eleanor stepped inside first, loosening her shawl. As Samuel filled their bowls, she lit the oil lamp and set it on the table. The flame flickered against the glass, casting a low glow over the walls. They ate side by side, the day's quiet settling around them like a blanket. When the meal was done, she stood and reached into the cupboard. From behind the tin of rye flour, she pulled a small folded cloth. She laid it on the table and opened it slowly. Inside was a carved wooden ring, worn smooth at the edges. Samuel blinked. "What's that?" "My father gave it to my mother their first year on the land," she said. "She wore it on a cord around her neck until the day she died. I found it tucked in her sewing tin last summer." He watched her carefully. "I want to keep it," she said, "but not because I'm holding on to what's gone." He waited. "I want to wear it for what's coming." He rose without a word, stepped around the table and took her hands in his. "Then let's make something worth keeping." She nodded, eyes bright, and slipped the ring onto a leather cord. He tied it gently behind her neck, letting it rest just above the hollow of her collarbone. That night, they sat by the fire while the wind moved soft over the cabin eaves. She leaned into him, head resting against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her without needing to speak. The room was warm, the silence full. In the weeks that followed, they planted peas and beans, then onions and carrots. Eleanor stitched curtains from muslin scraps and hung them with care. Samuel built a frame for the chicken coop and thatched the roof with pine shakes. The hens arrived in a crate from Bridger, and Eleanor named each one after wildflowers. Neighbors began stopping by not out of pity or curiosity, but to trade seeds, borrow tools, share news. Samuel never spoke for her. He stood beside her always, but never in front. One afternoon, she brought home 2 books from town, one on herbal remedies and another on orchard keeping. She read by lamplight, taking notes in a small ledger. When spring fully settled, they walked to the far end of the pasture and marked where the peach trees would go come fall. In early June, they exchanged vows beneath the cottonwoods by the creek, just the 2 of them and a witness from town. Samuel wore his Sunday coat and Eleanor wore a dress she'd sewn herself. The ring stayed on its cord, resting above her heart. They didn't speak grand words or make promises they couldn't keep. Just simple truths. I see you, I choose you, I will stay. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft with dusk, they walked home hand in hand. the land around them alive with the sound of frogs and the rustle of new leaves. And for the first time in a long, long time, Eleanor O'Neal McCrae knew her life was hers, not built from what had been lost, but from all that had grown in its place. A life rooted in gentle days, honest work, and a love that asked nothing but presence. They lived quiet years, full ones. The kind that leave no need for retelling, only remembering, and they remembered it all together.